ready now to look at how did others take action against slavery. So that's our focus for this week. How did others take action against slavery? By the end of this week, probably the middle of the week, we're going to be able to answer that question. And then by the end of the week, you'll take then each of these things that we've talked about so far as questions and documents and pictures, all the things that we've learned so far, to help you then form an opinion paper about did Charles Sumner deserve it or not. So right now for today, we are going to talk about how others took actions against slavery. One of those people that took action against slavery that we have not talked about in our classroom yet, his name is John Brown. This is a picture of John Brown. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him because you do not know about John Brown. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background knowledge from when he grew up, and then after he was growing up and really what made him be the person that he is and who he is, tell you a little bit of background knowledge about him to get it in your schema. Then we're going to analyze an image and a document that go together about him, and you can make some opinions and form some judgments, draw some conclusions about that part. Okay? So, John Brown, first of all. It says at Harper's Ferry. Okay? Yes?
It's like when you meet the judge and then they decide if you're guilty or not.
Exactly. Now, you have on your desk a picture, an image of the trial and execution of John Brown. Now, when I say trial, right here, trial, you just said you go before the judge and they decide whether you're guilty or not. What does execution mean? What does that mean, Trent?
Like killing you?
Yes, the person is killed for what their actions were that they did. So when we see this, it's the trial and execution of John Brown. What does that tell you happened to John Brown because of his revolt actions, Berkeley? He was killed for it. So this trial, the outcome was John Brown was to die for what he had done by taking over Harper's Ferry. Okay? Now, think about it. John Brown was a religious man, a minister, who believed in stopping slavery. Good thing, not good thing. Give me your thumbs. Thumbs up or thumbs down on that? What do you think? Okay? So he believed in stopping it. Okay? Do you think taking over Harper's Ferry and killing people in the process was a way that he should have gone about that? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Okay? So he was willing to look at even violent ways. So we have different people looking at slavery in a variety of ways. Harriet Beecher Stowe. Did she use violent ways?
She wrote a book. How was that violent?
Do you think her book helped get the cause of no more slavery across? The point of it. Okay? We have Frederick Douglass. Okay? What did he do to try and tell no more slavery? What was his actions? He gave lots of speeches and talks and stuff talking about it, didn't he? Okay? So we've also heard of people who took violent actions. Now, John Brown was one of them who did that exactly. We are now going to be ready to read this document that goes with this image right here. Question, Lindsay, before we start?
Well, I was wondering, it's kind of strange that a minister would do something like that.
Right. So Nat Turner also was a minister. John Brown had religious ideas too. So there were some people who would go to any extreme, is what that tells us, because they wanted slavery to stop. Okay? Now, even today, do people go to extremes to try and get things their way? Okay? That even happens on the playground. Let's think about it for a second. If there's somebody out on the playground, have you ever seen somebody get pushed before by somebody else or hit by somebody else and because they didn't get what they wanted and they wanted it? Yeah, so that's a violent way of doing that. Is that the way that we handle it at Prairie Ridge, or we're supposed to handle it at Prairie Ridge? No, it's not. So we have to look. There's two different ways to think about it. Abolitionists weren't just people who were violent trying to stop it, but there were abolitionists who used violence to stop it. Okay? So, what happens to somebody when you're captured and you're going to go on trial? Where are you put? Where are you put? Olivia, do you know?
Prison for until the trial.
Yep, prison or jail. You call it either one until the trial. So, this actual document is here, is an address to Virginia court before his death sentence. John Brown wrote this in 1859. Okay? Now, let's source it down here first. It says John Brown, 1859, addressed to John Brown to the Virginia court before death sentence, 1859. It was taken from the Library of Congress. That's actually where this image is kept now, and this document is kept now. Both of them were from there. So now let's look to see what he says. So he knows right now that he is going to be put to death for what he did. He knows that. He's writing about it while he's in prison, and he's asking to be able to read this or tell this and be addressed to the court, talking to the court then before he knows he's going to be killed for that. So here's what it starts at. I have, may it please the court, a few words to say. In the first place, I deny everything but what I have already admitted to of the design or the plan on my part to free the slaves. I plan to free slaves without causing problems. Did that happen? No. As I did last winter when I went into Missouri and there took slaves without the snapping of a gun on either side, moving them through the country and finally left them in Canada. Talk to a partner. What does that part mean? Go. 3, 2, 1, 0. He said, my plan was to do this like I did last winter, before this Harper's Ferry thing happened, when I went into Missouri and there took slaves without snapping a gun, that means using no weapons, on either side, moving them through the country, and finally left them in Canada. What does that mean? What do you think? Lauren, where are they at? What are they on?
They're going to a free state.
They're going to a free place, you're right. Canada is free. So what's that called that they're traveling on? What is that, Kale?
The Underground Railroad.
The Underground Railroad. You're exactly right. I desired to have done the same thing again on a much larger scale. So his idea was he was trying to free more people, wasn't he? That was all I intended. So that's all I meant to do. I never did intend murder or treason or destruction of property or to excite or incite, that means encourage, slaves to rebellion, to act out in violence, or to make insurrection, that means to act out in violence himself. So he wasn't trying to get slaves to do that, and he said he wasn't trying to himself really do that. Okay? Tell me, do you think you're believing that right now? No. Okay? Let's keep reading. The court acknowledges or recognizes too, as I suppose, that the authority of the power of the law of God. I saw a book kissed here, which I suppose to be the Bible, or at least the New Testament, which teaches me that all things whatsoever I would that men should do to me, I should do even so to them. It teaches me further to remember them that are in the bonds as to bound with them. I tried to act up to that instruction. I say I am yet too young to understand that God is any respecter of persons, that God does not show favorites to different people. I believe that to have interfered or prevented, as I have done, as I have always freely admitted to have done, in behalf of the hated and the poor. Who are the hated and the poor? The slaves, exactly. So he's trying to say that as God has always taught me to try and help them, that's all I was trying to do, was to help. Okay? But have done no wrong, but right. He's done no wrong, but right. And do you see, what did he do? Capitalized it. Why would he capitalize that? Why do we capitalize things that we want to put into text when all the rest of it's not capitalized? What's the reason for that, Allie?
Because you really want them to notice it. Like, if
Yeah.
I calculate something that I'm like yelling, or like something that I'm shocked
I
about.
mean it, right?
Yeah. Look at it. It's like,
So I have done no wrong, but right is what he's saying. Let's read the last part. Now, if it is decided to be necessary that I should forfeit my life and die for going forward of the ends of justice, and mingle my blood further with the blood of my children, and with the blood of millions in this slave country, whose rights are disregarded by wicked, cruel, and unjust laws, I say, let it be done. So let it be done means giving up his life for his cause. He said, if you're telling me now I have to give up my life for this, I give up my life for this. But I still feel like I was standing up for who? The slaves. Okay? Talk to a partner and tell them what you think about that right now. Go. We have a new kind of like number note sheet where we're going to keep track of our ideas for this question. How did others take action against slavery? You can see in this bench, what is this one right here? Yeah, it's our trial, isn't it? So what happened in the document, in the image that we were talking about today? What was something, an action that was taken against slavery? What was that? Talk to a partner right now what you think would be like a yellow in here. What do you think about this? What would be a yellow that we could put in here, like just a dot? Charlie, what are you thinking? A rebellion. So a rebellion was what he was doing again, a revolt, wasn't it? So I'm going to put rebellion underneath here. Rebellion / revolt. When he was where? Where was he at? Where was he at, Allie?
He was at this own place where they keep all
The arsenal?
Yeah, the arsenal where they keep all the...
So can we put Harper's Ferry underneath that?
Yeah.
So Harper's Ferry. And who was this? Who was this that was doing this? Do you remember, Caroline?
John Brown.
John Brown. A rebellion or a revolt at Harper's Ferry carried out by John Brown. So, one way then that abolitionists, actions that they took up were sometimes by revolting or having a rebellion was one way that we've learned about so far. So let's put a revolt here at the top. And there was a trial then that said that that was not the proper way to do it. Would you agree or disagree with that? Agree. So, what else do we know about him that some of you said you were surprised? Lindsay, I believe it was you that said you were surprised that he was what?
Because he's a minister, why would he do something that's violent?
Right.
I don't think that means violent.
So minister is something else we know about him. So, did revolts, Nat Turner's revolt, remember we talked about that, her rebellion his rebellion that we were talking about, Nat Turner, this one was end well for Nat Turner or for John Brown? No. So would that be the way that abolitionists would want to fight against slavery?
No.
So some ways might have worked well, other ways not so much. Would you agree? So then what could we put down below here about what you just said? Did it work well or not work well?
Not well.
Not well. So we have decided that violence, not successful for abolitionists. We have violent ways. That doesn't help as much, does it? So today we have one way others took action against slavery. Would you please tell a partner right now, what was that way that we learned about today that an abolitionist took action against slavery? Go.
Well, John Brown action abolitionists did not. This flag, USA, this flag, yeah, some it's still 3 though. I think it's 3. I think it's 3 though. Why are we not 2? Why are we not 2? Hey, you guys just stop slavery too. It's not what it says. That's how it's
So in conclusion today then, what is a way that we took action against slavery? Toby.
He said he would release slaves without problem.
Yeah, so what is John Brown trying to do? He's trying to stop slavery, you said. How is he trying to do that?
With no problem.
Yeah, with no problem. Was it a problem?
Yes.
Because what was it? Yes. Friends, we have talked that we're looking at the question of how did others take action against slavery. We learned a little bit about John Brown already in his way of looking at it with his rebellion and his revolt and taking over Harper's Ferry. Now we're ready to look at somebody else who also took some action against slavery. This person is actually another reverend or a minister, as we talked about John Brown being too. So this is the sermon on the Fugitive Slave Bill by Reverend Nathaniel Colker. It was written on October 20th of 1850. What else do we put up on our timeline that was 1850? Does anybody remember what it was? What was it?
Outrage.
Outrage is up there, but that one's not 1850. Okay. What was on here that we were putting on that happened in 1850? Do you remember what it is? I'm going to give you a clue. It now means that slaves can be taken back.
Fugitive slave law.
Fugitive slave law. So, when we're giving a sermon on it, look, it's because the fugitive slave law has just passed. Now, Reverend Nathaniel Culver says, let's see what we think about this. All right? So let's break it into parts right now. Here's what he said. If we know he's giving a sermon, where's he at? Ethan, put that away, please, and be with me. Where would he be at if he's given a sermon? Please put that away. Caroline, where's he going to be? He's going to be in a church, right? Because he is a minister and a preacher. So he's giving a sermon on it. He's a reverend. It says, we have encouraged disobedience, meaning refuse to obey the rules, to this law for the recapture of runaway fugitive slaves. And we have urged such disobedience not as thoughtless, but as pushing against some heavy burden or weight imposed on force on us, but as a moral duty, a duty solemnly and seriously required of God, because this law requires us to violate it or disobey it. I'm going to stop there for just a second. Just, I guess, a little bit more. His law, and to stain ourselves with no ordinary guilt. In that part, because that's a lot right there, let's stop. Talk to a partner. What's he telling people that they can do by reading that? Talk to a partner right now.
They can use violence to solve the slave problem. Or violence if slaves run away and stuff. The fugitive slave law probably said that's probably how the masters were able to cut slaves' toes off.
What does that first part say right up there? That first part, what is he telling the people who are sitting in his church? What is he talking about in that part, Alexis? The slave law. What's he saying about the slave law?
That they can try to stop it.
They can try and stop it. Do they have to follow the fugitive slave law? So now we have a reverend who is saying to his church members, you don't have to follow this law. Yeah. Do you agree? Should slaves, once they get freed, have to be taken back? So if you were in this church, would you be agreeing with him or disagreeing with him? Agreeing? All right, so you think it's okay for us to say, nope, we're not going to listen to the fugitive slave law. Well, let's keep reading and see what else he says. And we urge it still, but let no one think for a moment that we are going to act out in violence. Okay? How is that different from John Brown? Talk to a partner. How is that different than John Brown? 3, 2, 1, 0. Charlie, you were just talking to me. Tell me what you told me about that part.
The difference is John Brown had a rebellion for the hunger, and he saved doing peaceful, and very peaceful ways.
Yes, so he's saying that we do not want to act out in violence. We want to do this in some sort of peaceful way. Let's keep reading and see what he suggests. And so we will not obey this wicked law of the Fugitive Slave Act. Every law of the land gives us all the privilege, the right not to disobey it and be tried for a crime of betraying our country. But to disobey it and receive the prescribed penalty, that means getting a punishment set for breaking the law is what we should get if we do this. If anyone studies or refuses the former, then if anyone refuses to obey the fugitive slave law but agrees to the punishment for breaking the law, he is not a rebel. You're not rebelling if you do that. Instead, he's saying you are someone who's just simply going against it. You don't agree with it. That's what he thinks. Do all in your power without violence to protect the fugitives from their seizures or arrest. Who are the fugitives? The slaves. Or to hide them from pursuit of people chasing them. Yeah, we learned about some people chasing and going after slaves, didn't we? Okay, slave catchers, you're exactly right. So he says, hide them, feed them, comfort him in his danger and suffering with loyalty, self-sacrifice and sympathy that you would if that poor, trembling fugitive from oppression if you were saving him, just as if you were saying Jesus Christ is what he is talking about in his sermon. So he's saying treat any slave as if you were trying to help them, as if it was Jesus Christ. For he is the chosen representative that you do it for. So he is saying that we should be people who work on what? People who work on what? When we feed them, comfort them, hide them, keep them from their suffering, where are they at, Allie?
But probably at, I can't remember the name of it, but they're probably at like an abolitionist house.
An abolitionist, so it could be a
Like
house.
Miss Carol.
What else could it be?
Like where they put out like they have that chimney that has a white.
Yeah. How the chimneys were painted for safe houses. You're exactly right. So it might be a safe house. Mm-hmm.
It might be like maybe he's like telling them. Like maybe they live by the Underground Railroad, and he's telling them put something else so the slaves know they can punch you and get help.
So he's saying be a part of the Underground Railroad.
Yeah.
Okay. Tomorrow, since that's our bell to get ready to go today, we will fill out one other way today. Would you please just leave your documents on your desk? Put this one inside your folder, your yellow folder, so you know where it's at tomorrow. So what did you just talk to your partner about that we spoke of yesterday, of how others took action against slavery? Berkeley, can you help us out?
The John Brown.
The John Brown at Harper's Ferry yesterday. What happened with John Brown at Harper's Ferry yesterday? Allie, do you remember?
He wanted to take over this thing,
The arsenal?
yeah, the arsenal. He wanted to take all the weapons. I'm going to take all the weapons. You can't fight against the North anymore. I'm taking all your weapons.
Mm-hmm.
But then they held him there and he got killed.
Yeah, exactly. So why, did he get killed on that day, or was it a different day?
Different day.
Yeah, why? What happened, Charlie?
Well, he attacked the base or whatever, and he went to trial, and they said his price was execution.
Exactly right. So here is just a little one-page summary of that I found in this book that we've been reading together. Harper's Ferry. In the tense atmosphere of the late 1850s, both Northerners and Southerners were frightened what would happen next. The answer was given by John Brown. Brown had a bold plan. He wanted to start a slave uprising. Brown raised money and gathered weapons. He found and trained recruits. Wait till we're finished. Brown also met with Harriet Tubman to learn her escape routes from the South. Brown planned to rescue slaves, and then he would lead them to freedom in Canada. Brown planned to start his rescue by capturing the town of Harper's Ferry, Virginia. A government arsenal, a storehouse for weapons, was there. He wanted Frederick Douglass to join him, but Douglass tried to convince him that the plan would fail. One night in October of 1859, Brown and his men captured the arsenal, other buildings, and 2 bridges in Harper's Ferry. Then, some of his men went to nearby plantations to capture slave owners. Several slaves joined Brown's men. So far, no blood had been shed. But then Brown's men stopped a train and shot a man, and chaos followed. Church bells rang, people yelled that the slave uprising was taking place. Local troops arrived and fighting began. Brown took shelter in some of his men as their prisoner in an engine house. U.S. troops arrived and Brown refused to surrender. The soldiers stormed the engine house and Brown was wounded and captured. He was quickly tried and convicted. In early December, Brown was hanged. His raid on Harper's Ferry further divided the nation. The attack panicked the many Southerners. They thought the raid was a part of the Northern plot to end slavery by force, but many Northerners thought Brown was a hero. This right here is taking John Brown then to be hanged on his execution day. That is a picture of that in here. So that's a summary of the story after we looked at his letter yesterday of what he said about his account. Does it sound exactly the same as what this account was? No. He had a little bit different perspective on it, didn't he? But he was willing to give up his life to try and get slaves free. So we talked about yesterday how we were, we thought it was a good thing that he wanted to free slaves, but maybe that wasn't the best way to go about doing things that he did. Did you agree? And so yesterday we put on our number notes, there was a revolt and there was a rebellion. It was at Harper's Ferry, and it was John Brown as a minister, and his violence was not successful when what he did. Correct? Then yesterday, we looked at a sermon. This is the part we didn't have on our number notes yet that we need to add to it. We talked about the sermon yesterday, and what was the sermon telling people to do? Would you talk to a partner right now about what was the sermon telling people this message? Tally 3, 2, 1, 0. So yesterday, when we read in the sermon on the Fugitive Slave Bill, what was the Reverend Nathaniel Culver trying to tell people in his sermon? What was he speaking to them about? Caroline?
He was saying, don't listen to the fugitive slave law. And if you're going to do anything about it, make sure it's a peaceful way.
Exactly. She said two important things. Not to listen to the fugitive slave law, but to do that in a peaceful way to stand against it, right? Those are two things that he said. What did he say that they could do, that he really wanted them to do? What was he encouraging people to do within this? Here, Olivia?
Peaceful protest?
Peaceful protest. Was he asking them to stand up against it?
Yep.
Okay. Well, what was he doing? Help us out.
Stand up against the fugitive slave law.
How would you stand up against the fugitive slave law? What'd you do, Allie?
By disobeying.
By disobeying. And what would you do if you were disobeying it and you weren't following it? What would you be doing, Hank? Trying to free slaves how? On the Underground Railroad. So he was saying in here, if you happened upon any of them, be sure and help hide them, feed them, comfort them from danger and suffering, and help them to get where? To freedom. Exactly. So in his sermon, this is what was happening. Now, do you remember during this time period, if you were helping a freed slave and you were an abolitionist, could good or bad things happen to abolitionists if they got caught?
Bad.
Bad. So when you're giving this sermon, you're also then telling people that if you do this, we also have to look at it, though, you could cause a problem for yourself, couldn't you? All right. So, in knowing that, let's go back to our number notes right here and put another dot on here, because now we have a reverend who's telling us that we should do what? What should we put on?
Disobey the fugitive slave law.
Disobey the fugitive slave law. So let's put fugitive slave law. Disobey. Okay? So if we're telling them to disobey the fugitive slave law, Caroline, you brought out another important point. What was it?
To do it
Peaceful ways. So nonviolence. Peaceful / nonviolence ways. Okay? Toby, something else you'd like to add to that? Sure can, thank you. So we want to do this in peaceful, nonviolent ways. Now I'm thinking back to John Brown, and he was a minister. And then we have Reverend, who is like another name for a minister. They both were very religious people. Would you say that's true? All right, so if we know that, John Brown used violence, and we said that he was not successful. How was this? Do you think this was more successful to disobey the fugitive slave law than the violence ways? Okay. So how was it successful? What did they do? What did they do?
When they disobeyed it, it's not doing it in a violent way. They just disobey the rules for standing up.
Okay, but how do they do that, Jace?
You just like take them and you just
Yeah, so help them to freedom.
you just don't do something to people who like you.
Okay? And so we think this is more successful than the violence ways. So now, we have talked about two different ministers and different religious figures and ways that they took action against slavery. We have one more way to look at. And there's a document sitting on top of your desk right now that looks like this. Would you take that out? Plus, you're going to need your pencil and your highlighter during this time. So your pencil, your highlighter, and this document right here. This document is actually 2 pages. It's our last source to look at when we are trying to decide right now ways in which people took action against slavery. I'm going to zoom out so we can see here. Yours is on a front and back. I have mine on 2 separate sheets. All right? So you have a back side to yours if you're trying to figure out why you don't have 2 pieces of paper and I have 2 pieces of paper up here. All right? Yours is just on the back. We have not highlighted anything yet. You're going to be highlighting a little bit different. Before, we've highlighted where we put the vocabulary words that we looked up. Today is something different. So at the very top of your paper, we're going to make a key right here. You ready? So do a little highlighter, and then do a little pencil mark. And that's going to be where our key is at. Right? So now I have it at the top. So, connection is a highlighter. The connection means, ooh, I know, I've learned that before already. I can make a connection to that. We've done that a lot, haven't we? Made connections, text to self, text to text, text to world, right? All right, so today, when I'm reading, I'm going to stop at paragraphs or parts of it, and you're going to highlight things, not whole sentences, but some key words and some key things that are like things like, yep, I know that already. The pencil is, aha. Aha. And an aha means, ooh, I didn't know that one before. That's something kind of cool that I did not know about the Underground Railroad. And I'm going to underline it with my pencil because it's a new thing rather than something that I already knew about. Okay? So that's what aha means. All right? Now, before we start reading this, I'm going to go down here to the very bottom of the source and source it because we know we always source first. Underground Railroad, 2012. The New Book of Knowledge, okay? And it's from the Groyler Online Dictionary. So it's from an online source. And it was actually created in 2012. So is it somebody who lived during the Underground Railroad that actually made this? No. No, it is not. So it's a secondary source. It means it's somebody who studied and researched it, and now they're writing their account of it. All right? So, to start us off at the very beginning, would you go to where it starts the title, The Underground Railroad, the New Book of Knowledge. So that's actually the title of where it was at online of this piece. All right? So now you're going to need your highlighter open, and you're going to need your pencil. Those are the 2 things you need. I'm going to read the first paragraph. Don't write anything yet. All right? Wait till I'm done reading it. After I'm done reading it, I'm going to say highlight or underline. Highlight means to highlight over keywords or key things that I already know about. Underline with your pencil means to go ahead and do my aha. I did not know that yet, but I know that now. Okay? So, it starts off like this. The Underground Railroad was not a railroad, and it did not run underground. It was a secret network of refuge stations in the United States operated by Northern abolitionists, both black and white. It was created to help runaway slaves escape from the South where they were held in bondage in the days before the Civil War. I'm done reading that paragraph. Would you please highlight some key things that you already know about? or underline something if it's a new aha. Next job. Please share with a partner what you highlighted and things that you underlined. Either one. Share those right now. Go.
So I knew that.
None of this was yellow to you? So none of this Are you touching and touching me?
The Abolitionists. I underlined.
All right. Here's the first thing that I would like. Okay? And there's going to be so many. I have the feeling that we don't have time to share them all. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to draw a stick. Would you tell me something that you highlighted if I call your name? Okay? Peyton Crandall. Something you highlighted. Not really a railroad. Kimberly. Not underground. Berkeley.
I knew it was created to help the slaves.
Help the slaves. Thank you. Allie.
It was operated by Northern Abolitionists.
By Northern Abolitionists. Charlie.
Blacks and whites could want it.
Blacks and whites both were running it. Okay? Now, is there anybody else who has something highlighted? I picked about 5 people right there. Something else highlighted, Lindsay?
It was a secret network.
Secret network. Okay, Olivia?
It was before the Civil War.
Before the Civil War.
It was created to help runaway slaves escape from the South, where they were held in bondage in the days before the Civil War.
All right, so now, anybody have an aha? Was there any part in that first paragraph you're like, aha, I didn't know that part? Trent?
Both black and white run the railroad.
All right.
I know black people ran the railroad too.
Yeah. So we knew that there were conductors like Harriet Tubman on it, so she would be considered like helping run it. So you're right. It's a good point to point out. It was both of them who were actually running it, not just on it, but running it. Good point. Yes.
I underlined bondage because I didn't really know.
Do you know what bondage means now? Have you figured out by what we read?
Like people are held in a place where they can't go.
Yeah, exactly. Slavery is another word for bondage. Okay? Ethan.
I didn't know that it was a network of refuge stations.
Yeah. So remember how we talked about stations along the way? That's really what they mean about that. They're just putting a fancy word in front of it. A network is a system, is what that means. Does that help now knowing what that word is?
Yeah.
Awesome. Mason.
You mean like a video game network, or
It could be, but this is...
Underground Railroad network?
Yes, this is the Underground Railroad Network. Now, we're going to do the same thing on the next paragraph. Are you ready? Okay, here it goes. Over a period of about 40 years, from the 1820s until the war began in 1861, many brave rescuers helped an estimated 40,000 slaves north to freedom. Many fugitives escaped to Pennsylvania, New York, and Massachusetts, but most ended up in Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. They used the Mississippi and Ohio rivers as escape routes. Thousands more fled to Canada. There, officials refused to turn them over to the authorities in the United States. Others escaped to Mexico, where slavery had been abolished in 1829. And they escaped to colonies in the Caribbean, where slavery had been abolished by the British in 1833. Okay, I'm done reading that paragraph. Highlight things that you knew. Underline things that are ahas for you. Now here's my guess. My guess is that first paragraph, a lot of that you already knew, but there might be some ahas in this one. Okay? So let's start off with ahas this time, because I think there's going to be some new things in there. I'm going to draw a few more sticks so I get to hear from everybody right now. Austin, can you tell me an aha? The Caribbean? Yeah, so they went down in the Caribbean because it was already abolished there. Where else was it abolished? There's another place. Where was it, Jace? Mexico. So some slaves actually went south to those. We talked a lot about them going to north to Canada to get free and going to the northern states. But we didn't really talk that much about going to Mexico and the Caribbean in the southern places where they'd already abolished slavery.
I wonder if slaves went to Cancun once. Cancun is way in the back.
So that would be something you could do a little bit of research on, Mason, to find out.
Yeah, and that's where I usually go on vacations in January.
I knew it was your vacation spot, so that would be something to check out, wouldn't it? Nadia, did you have something else to add? All right. So now, anybody else have? Miss Nadia, you're my next stick. Could you please tell me, is there something new that you have underlined other than that?
They use the Mississippi and Ohio rivers in escape as
Yeah. So the rivers were escape routes. Now, we do know something about why that might be, though. Why did they want to go into water?
because it won't trap the smell.
Right, their scent and their smell. We learned about that, didn't we? So those two main rivers, the Ohio River and the Mississippi River, were the two main ones that they used as escape routes for that. Another aha. Trent, did you have another thing underlined that you could share with us, or are all yours taken?
I didn't know others escaped to Mexico.
All right, so that was an interesting one for you. Olivia.
At first, I thought the one about Caribbean was kind of odd. And then I remembered, I had this when right before I started third grade, I read this book about Harriet Tubman when she was little. And it said something about how slaves were going to Caribbean and Mexico.
Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't only North America that was getting enslaved, was it? Exactly. Toby.
When you were talking about when they're in the water, that's when Wade in the Water was made.
That's how that song Wade in the Water was made that you guys know so well. Allie?
I didn't know
Charlie, stop. Say it a little bit louder, Allie. I couldn't hear you.
I didn't know many states in Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts, but most ended up in Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio.
So most ending up in Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. We did know about Pennsylvania because what story did we read where somebody ended up there? Addie, exactly. So that one probably wasn't a new one to you, but the other ones might have been. Let's go on to the next paragraph. Here we go. The railroad. According to legend, around 1831, a fugitive, mercilessly hunted by a slave catcher, suddenly vanished from sight. Baffled and angry, one of his pursuers reported grumbly, "He must have gone on an underground road." The saying caught on, but the word railroad was later substituted. Perhaps this happening when this exciting new form of transportation started capturing everyone's imagination. The network of friends who aided the fugitive communicated in a code made up of railroad terms. Guides became conductors or station masters. The hiding places were known as stations or depots. Escape itself was referred to as catching the next train. Conductors were usually warned when to expect the next freight or package so that proper precautions could be taken. I'm going to stop there. Highlight things you knew, underline things that are ahas. Go. partner sitting next to you something that you highlighted and something that you underlined. Go. All right, let's hear some ahas from this point. Let's see here. Hank, what's one that you put on there? Yeah, so you didn't realize they were called station masters. You knew of conductors, but not station masters. All right. How about Lindsay? Do you have one that you underlined that we haven't said yet?
Yeah, a few slaves started the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, the idea of somebody actually getting away started the whole idea of it. Jace, did you have something different? Or are all yours taken? All of them are taken. Let's read a little bit more is what that tells me then. Okay, Olivia, one last one.
I didn't know because I thought it was an underground road.
An underground road.
Do you think
It's the
somebody
story of how
would
it just
stumble over it?
could be. Mason, please put your pencil down and be with us here. Nadia?
I didn't know that there was a legend about the hunted slave catchers.
Okay. So we're finding out some interesting things that we didn't know before. We're now going down to sheltering. Are you with me? Here we go. Sheltering fugitive slaves was dangerous. This was because slave catchers were always quick on the heels of a runaway. Hostile neighbors routinely reported activities they considered suspicious. Even those who were sympathetic might accidentally betray the conductor to slave catchers, who rarely hesitated to use the guns that they carried. The work became even more dangerous after the Fugitive Slave Law passed by Congress in 1850. We already have that up on the timeline, don't we? Okay. This law took away a slave's last measure of protection. It declared that anyone who helped a fugitive in the North or the South could be fined or put in prison. But the law infuriated abolitionists. The only served to strengthen the anti-slavery movement in the North, which goes back to the sermon that Reverend Culver was actually giving, saying, okay, we're going to make this stronger. We're going to ignore this law, and we are going to help them to freedom. So his makes a direct connection to this paragraph. Would you please highlight anything that you're like, yep, I already knew that. Or, oh, I did not know that one. Aha, underline it. Would you please share with a partner something that you highlighted and something that you underlined? Go. All right, let's hear now some that you underline. Jace, we didn't get to share one last time because yours were all taken. Can you share for us this time? What's something you underlined in that one? Still working? I'll come back to you. Okay? Alicia, what's one thing that you underlined in that part? Very dangerous thing to do, wasn't it? Logan, you were just sharing with me something that you didn't realize before. What is it?
The work became even more dangerous after the Fugitive Slave Law was passed by Congress in 1850.
Yes, we might have known before it was dangerous, but we didn't realize that when that law was passed, that even made it more dangerous for the people, didn't it? Let's read means of escape. It's going to go onto your back side here in just a second. Fugitives generally moved into the dark of night and hid during the day. Most of them were on their own when traveling through the southern states. They, too, depend on their own cunning until they got to the border and free states. There, abolitionists could offer them assistance and direct or transport them to the next station. For most, the North Star, the brightest star in the constellation, Ursa Minor, served as their only compass. I'm going to read the next paragraph too because I know that you know a lot of that already. So let's keep reading a little bit more. A favorite way to transport a fugitive from one station to another was to hide the slave at the bottom of a farm wagon underneath a heap of farm produce. Cities presented special difficulties. All kinds of tricks had to be used if a number of fugitives were involved. Funeral processions were a favorite means of getting a party of fugitives across a city. The closed carriages and long black veils provided perfect disguises. The methods of concealment were endless. One resourceful Virginia slave had a friend nail him in a box and ship him as freight to an anti-slavery people in Philadelphia. Connection. Who is that, my friends?
Henry's Freedom Box.
You're exactly right. The story Henry's Freedom Box, Henry Box Brown. Another slave rode the anchor of a ship for 3 days until a friend was able to haul him aboard. Okay. Highlight, underline, go.
Oh my gosh.
Ha for you, Olivia.
Mine was, Grandpa was, funeral processions were a favorite since they're getting a party of fugitives.
Yeah. So pretending like you're going to a funeral and all dressing up in black and wearing these veils, black veils over your face and having this procession of wagons or stuff, and then we're hiding slaves in there the entire time and no one knew it. It's actually kind of cool, isn't it? Yeah, so that was a new way that maybe you didn't know of before. Anybody else have anything that they underlined? Nadia?
I didn't know that the North Star was the brightest star.
The North Star is the brightest star. So we've learned a little bit about the North Star already and followed the Ricky board, didn't we? So that was just a new thing for you to know about that. Let's read the last little bit right here, and we'll be finished with this part of it. It says, abolitionists in Philadelphia, New York, Boston, and other cities formed strong vigilance committees made up of both blacks and whites. These committees assisted the underground movement. They gave protection to fugitives and raised money for clothing, food, and shelter. They also helped with practical and legal advice. Quakers, member of the Religious Society of Friends, were known for their humanitarianism. They were particularly active in the Underground Railroad. Levi Coffin, who was known as the president of the Underground Railroad, and Thomas Garrett, a prominent businessman, were both Quakers. The two of them alone assisted nearly 5,000 fugitives. Yeah, a lot. Ohio gained a great reputation for its anti-slavery activities. In the evenings, Friends would patrol sections of the north bank of the Ohio River. They waited to assist those fugitives who made it across. In Ripley, Ohio, the Ratkins, a Presbyterian minister, and his 7 sons put a welcoming beacon light in their window every night for nearly 30 years. Many blacks who had escaped would themselves return to the South to rescue family members and friends. Connection, listen to this. Harriet Tubman escaped from Maryland. She returned 19 times and brought out 300 fugitives on the Underground Line, including her parents. Slave owners offered rewards totaling $40,000 for her capture. White Northerners, disgusting themselves to hide their identities, went south to spread the word of the Underground Railroad. White Northerners, disguising themselves to hide their identities, went south to spread the word of the Underground Railroad. They casually dropped the word of escape in a black church or while gossiping over a fence with workers in a field. Some white Southerners also took part in spreading the word, but at great personal risk. Lewis Payne of Georgia spent 5 years in prison for putting a fugitive on the Underground Line. So in that last part that we just read, would you either highlight or underline parts that you think would best match your thinking?